Well, I just wanted to say congrats. This is the second that I've been to, and it's an outstanding job. It's my great honor to introduce number 74, Rick Spitzer, into the Roxbury High School Athletic Hall of Fame. It's not often that you get an opportunity to speak publicly about someone who you grew up admiring, a person who has been a great mentor, a great example to me, to my brothers and sisters, a great leader and a real hero to all of us. So I am very blessed and thankful that I have the opportunity to speak to you about Rich today. So Rich has always been recognized as a tremendous leader, a great competitor, and an overachiever in almost everything he's ever done. As a child, in high school, in college, his professional career, his marriage, and within his own family. So I've been kind of thinking hard over the last several days and weeks, what would I share with you about Rich today, and where do I start? And it dawned on me that I should just probably go back to the beginning, at least where I think it started. And I believe it all started with Rich, in our home, on Conkling Road, up on Mooney Mountain, and in our neighborhood. So Rich is the second child of 9, of Mary Lou and Dick Spitzer. He's the oldest son of 7 boys. This wasn't much different than the situation that my father was raised in. And Dad placed a great deal of responsibility on Rich as we were growing up. He expected that Rich would set an example for the rest of us to follow. Rich was given the responsibility to watch over us, protect us, and to teach us at the same time. And so that meant that Rich, wherever he went, he always had a younger sibling or 2 or 3 following behind him. So essentially Rich's role was to teach us how to do whatever he did the way that he did it. And when we moved to Roxbury back in the mid-60s, there were a ton of other kids in the neighborhood, most around our age, some a few years older. And that meant there was always an opportunity for some type of a competitive event to take place at any moment. The older boys in the neighborhood, set up the baseball and the football games. And when they didn't, Rich was one of those guys that would organize us. Go down and fumble. Most people refer to that as rugby. That was a big game in our neighborhood. There was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears during those games. Baseball games took place in our next door neighbors, the Sheary's backyard, occasionally up at the Netcom field. Ice hockey would be played down at Conkling Pond. And basketball, could be played in anybody's driveway or sometimes down at Mooney Mountain Park. But football, well, that took place in our front yard most of the time. The evergreen tree by the driveway, that was one of our goal lines. The sidewalk along Conkling Road, that was our other goal line. And you never really wanted to get tackled on that sidewalk. But I recall Rich once saying, he goes, well, that's the payoff. You drive the ball down the field, you score, the pain goes away. The sideline along our house, there were flowers there, and my dad had these prize flowers, and you didn't ever want to get pushed out of bounds or tackled there. So you learned how to balance, you learned how to stay in bounds, or if you're going to get knocked out of bounds, you learn how to jump over the flowers into the trees. Every day at night, 5:30 in the evening, my father would be driving home. He'd pull the van into the driveway, and then every kid who was playing football in our front yard, their 40-yard dash speed was tested. Because Dad would get out and everybody would split because my father was going to go and check out how, what conditions flowers were in. So as I mentioned, there are several older guys in the neighborhood who participated with us. They saw what the coaches would eventually see in Rich. He was a great athlete, very coachable, high desire to win, and he did it the right way. They respected him, they mentored him, they knew he had things under control for when they eventually wouldn't be around. Rich paid attention to them. He learned from them and how they played the game. He began to be introduced to the Roxbury tradition by guys like Rich Fashion, Paul Morgan, and the Savage brothers up the street. You know, and although these guys were 4 or 5 years older than Rich was, they treated him like an equal. So at an early age, you know, Rich had realized that there was much he could learn from those who came before him, and he did. So as these young guys moved on to the high school, you know, Rich took on an even greater role in, you know, on our block. You know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, Dad expected Rich to set an example for the rest of us. So Rich, you know, took great pride in being a peacemaker and an enforcer at the same time. You know, he expected respect. There were times when he was challenged by older guys, but Rich never backed down. He would defend himself, and he willingly defended others, you know, in any of those attacks. And because of that, we all benefited, especially you know, me and my brothers. You know, people knew who Rich was, and they, you know, they weren't going to mess with us because they knew what, you know, what that could lead to. Rich didn't suffer fools. So he had become a great leader and example to all of us. The greatest football games of our lives took place in that yard. You know, on those nights when my dad needed a break from life, he'd come out onto the field, onto the yard, a side yard, never in the front. And, you know, he'd throw the ball around with us. And Rich would have to give up his QB position. You know, Rich was always the guy throwing the ball. Rich gave it up to the old man, and, you know, Rich became a linebacker. And, you know, Dad would be throwing the ball around, and, you know, plenty of times there was an opportunity for Rich to intercept, but, you know, he just let it play. You know, my brothers and I, the rest of us, were kind of bouncing around the yard, and Rich would keep us all organized and try to make order of it. But sometimes it could be pretty competitive. But it was here that I believe that Rich and my brothers and I and my father, we all kind of gained a real love for the game of football. You know, football was family at that point. In 1975, Rich started high school. There was no question that he would play football, and for those of us who grew up with him, we had no doubt that he would be a great football player. We all got introduced to the game through him, and we became aware of the Roxbury High School Gales, the mighty, mighty Gales. We knew who Len Perfetti was because he was our lifeguard down at Ledgewood Basin. Dave Bennett, we were starting to hear his name all over town, Standridge, Ventura, Fashion, Morgan, and Baker too. And then we started hearing names as Rich, you know, went deeper into high school, like Constantine, Riley, Tardivi, Adams, Rafter, Pierre, and Vivian. And let's not forget the coaches. Jim Fiorello, Bob Morgan, Ron Rich, Howard Drake, George McKay, Don Ferrara, Dennis McDonald, Dick Pfeiffer, and Jack Lafferty. You know, all were his coaches at the time. And Rich would share with us, you know, what he was experiencing and try to help prepare the rest of us for what was to come. And of course, his name was being talked about around town, like so many of the great ones that came before him. And he was just getting started. So as Rich entered his junior year at Roxbury, he became focused on his next step, and that was to play college football. He became a workout fanatic. He became very involved in lifting weights. He spent a lot of time in the weight room, and he began to run a ton of miles. And of course, jumping rope. He knew to be the best he had to train and prepare himself. He earned a starting role as a two-way lineman, offensive and defensive tackle. And I can remember vividly his very first varsity football game. It was at Randolph. It was a night game. It was a torrential downpour all night long. And I sat between Mom and Dad. Rich had helped the Gales win that night. And as much as it pained my mother, she winced every time that Rich hit somebody. She became a pretty big fan of the game that night as well, and which was pretty good considering she had 6 more sons that were going to come through the program over the next 10 or so years. My dad loved the atmosphere. He absolutely loved it. Lots of elbows to my ribs, that night as he's watching Rich. Rich went on to have a great season that year, and he was well respected and was well feared at the same time. He became a tremendous wrestler, by this time as well, a true heavyweight, skilled at wrestling, great balance, great strength, agility, fearless. Names like Slack, Baumgardner, Goldenberg, Minnie, and Cook, these were some of the guys that he had wrestled at that time. And there was nothing like going to a Roxbury wrestling match back then. What made it all the more dramatic were those matches that came down to the last bout of the night, the heavyweight. Thunderous crowd noise, people stomping their feet on the wooden bleachers. It felt like a riot was going to break out at any time. And Rich, he would actually end those bouts pretty quickly because he was pretty pumped up himself. But you knew he absolutely loved being put in the position to win it all. He absolutely thrived in that. And again, we had this opportunity to share this with watching Rich with my dad. So when Rich entered his senior year, there were high expectations of him, but you could tell he had greater expectations of himself. He had become a dominating force. I recall the news clippings where coaches like John Chirona from Morristown would say, you can't block him, you need to run away from him. A guy like Jerry Tardivi saying that he was like a mountain. He was named co-captain of the team. He was focused on playing his best ball ever and taking the next step to Division I football. Rich never had to tell us, what his plans were. We just knew he was going to succeed. How could someone who put that much effort into something not succeed? He earned all area, all county, all conference, all state group 4, and all state all groups honors that year, as well as the Daily News all tri-state as a defensive tackle for Roxbury. He played in the North-South and the East-West All-Star games as a senior and representing Roxbury. He went on to earn the role of captain on the wrestling team as well. He earned outstanding wrestler, district championship honors, and regional championship honors. And then he earned a full scholarship to Rutgers University to play for head coach Frank Burns as a defensive tackle. And he was expected to take over the role that would be vacated that year by a player named Dino Mangiero. But something changed, that plan or those plans for him. He was asked to fill in during a defensive session as an offensive tackle. He buried the man he was blocking and was issued a transfer notice immediately to the offensive side of the ball. And under Coach Chief Taji. He was a 3+ year starter at right offensive tackle. Played against some legendary football players like Matt Millen, Mike Charles, Sal Sunseri, Mike Pitts, and Bruce Clark. He held a weightlifting record for the leg sled, over 1,200 pounds. He shook the hand of Paul Bear Bryant and John Madden, and he earned all East honors as a senior. So next step was the NFL. Richard had a tremendous career at Rutgers, but at that time there was not a lot of exposure for that program. And he had conversations with several teams during the lead up to the draft. 2 teams showed great interest in him, as I recall. The Seattle Seahawks and the Cleveland Browns. He was overlooked in the draft, but that didn't faze him. The morning after, he received several phone calls, including from the Dallas Cowboys. And he ultimately signed a free agent contract with the Seattle Seahawks. And within a few days, he headed to their mini camp and spent the summer there working out and doing everything he could to make the team. He was, unfortunately, the final cut on the final day of camp, but he did have the opportunity to play against Denver and see that fresh new kid from Stanford, John Elway, throw a few passes. Rich made one more attempt at professional football. That was with the USFL Pittsburgh Maulers, but unfortunately he injured his knee and was not able to continue. So Rich then took his competitive spirit into corporate America, going to work for the Xerox Corporation. He married Tammy Dunn, who he had met as a junior in high school. They have 4 wonderful children, Tom, Jen, Matt, and John. They had been out of the state for over the last 20 years, as Rich climbed the corporate ladder. He overachieved in every position he took on, taking on many roles in different facets of the company. He recently retired from there to take on another leadership role at another executive level. So he and Tammy recently came back to northern New Jersey, fortunately for all of us in the extended Spitzer family, as well as the Roxbury football family, back home where they belong, near their families. Rich even made time this past season to stop by and assist Michael and I and cheer on, his nephew Lucas at the junior males varsity football team. So a couple of things I just wanted to say and share, before I close. Back in 2012, my son Sean and his teammates, they were on their way to earn a state championship here for Roxbury under Coach LaRusso. And Rich and my brothers were able to attend several of those games, and it brought me back to my mind, to my parents watching Rich play. The electricity that was in the air back then, it was the same type of electricity we were feeling back in 2012. I became a true Roxbury football fan back in '75 because of Rich, and it's something that has stayed with me every day of my life since that first game I saw you play. The excitement that you and Mark and Chris and Michael and Alex and Barbara all displayed, it reminded me of how excited Mom and Dad would be watching you play. I would regularly say to Barbara during that 2012 season, how much would Mom and Dad love this? And I know how much they loved watching you play. I was there with them for most of those games. And I know that even though Mom and Dad, Mary Lou and Dick, are not here physically, they are here with us spiritually. I can also say that they would not be the least bit surprised at you receiving this honor. They would, however, be the most excited people in the room today. And you know that Dick Spitzer, he's got 20 copies of that article that introducing you into the hall, and he's sharing it with everybody, with wherever he is right now. And that Mom, she's on the phone, she's talking, she's giggling, she's laughing, the way she would whenever she was hearing or talking about great news within the family. So I just wanted to say to Rich, and congratulations on this great honor. Thanks for starting a trend, introducing your family and your friends to this great thing we all know as Roxbury football. Congratulations.
Thanks, Kevin. I can't think of anybody I'd rather introduce me. It's kind of a family affair. You got that from Kevin. He covered a lot of ground that I might have covered, so maybe I'll try to get us back on track. But first, I want to thank Stu Mason, the Roxbury High School Athletic Department Administration, and the Hall of Fame Committee, because this is an unbelievable honor. It's not something that you set as a goal or an objective. It comes out of left field and it blows you away. It's just really, really cool, to be here and to have this recognition. I saw Frank Dekmar for the first time in 30-something years. We used to play middle school football at Eisenhower Field, and who would know this, at this time we'd be back here on the same night being inducted. But I also want to congratulate all the other winners like Frank. Obviously, incredibly impressive contributions during your career at Roxbury, and great honor. So I'm going to kind of focus on a couple of themes: respect, appreciation, and pride. I'll try to keep it to 10 minutes because I know we're kind of long, but I want to thank some people because there's a lot of people who helped me get this recognition. In my family, you heard it from Kevin, we have tremendous respect for Roxbury athletics, Roxbury football, and in my case also Roxbury wrestling. And that comes from a very, very, very early time. My first impression, Kevin mentioned some of them already. Our first impression as a young kid, we used to go to Lakewood Basin and go to the lake and swim down there every day in the summer. And there was a guy named Lenny Perfetti, who you honored here a couple of years ago, who was our lifeguard. And he took the time to throw the football with us and to wrestle with us. And I saw him, more importantly, my mother saw him. And here's a guy wearing the Roxbury football t-shirt. And this guy is smart, he's respectful, he's athletic. It's all the right stuff. And not only did I see it, but she said, that's what you want to be. You want to be like that, right? So that was my first introduction to it. And then approaching high school, Kevin already mentioned it. There were guys up the street who played, and folks in this room, some of the folks in this room, players know the names, Jim and Chris Savage, Paul Morgan, the folks that played in my neighborhood, but it was like royalty. And we got to play in the front yard. Dad's front lawn was ripped up for 15 years straight, and we got to play with these guys, and that was our introduction. We never played Pop and Warner or anything like that. We played on the front lawn and tiptoed through the tulips and dove over to make sure that you didn't ruin anything. But then shortly thereafter, I started to pay attention because I was getting a little bit older and really watched some Roxbury football. And that's when I became aware of guys like Dave Bennett. I mean, Dave Bennett was God, right? And I say that with whole respect to God. But, Dave Bennett back then, anybody under 50 doesn't know who Larry Zonka is. But Dave Bennett was unbelievable. And, I just said, wow. And it was like, boy, he gets to wear the blue and gold. I want to be like that guy. And like other guys like him who played with him and around him, like Steve Bennett, Phil Parkins, Paul DeLuca. There was just all kinds of outstanding guys who just gave a great, great impression, around the program. So moving from there to the discussion of appreciation. First and foremost, I wanted, we were very raw materials, coming out of the front lawn. And, the one thing that we had, and Coach might say, you can't teach size. We had some size, but we didn't really have any skills. I mean, we threw the football, but I wasn't going to be playing quarterback. So we needed to get coached up. And one of the first ways you get that is you get older guys who take you under their wing, right? So there were a lot of guys a year or two ahead of me. And please, indulge me. I want to list some names because you don't get this opportunity but once in your life. Guys like Eddie Johnson, Mike Tardivi, Tom McMahon, Gary Moore, Jeff Adams. Some of them names you may have heard, some of them you didn't hear. But these are the guys who took the time and took you aside and helped teach you the way, right? And then as my career went on, my teammates and friends, a whole bunch of guys that, they're not here, but I want to mention them because they got me here. So Al Ruddy was the co-captain with me. Mike Rafter, Mark Kojak, Marty Ventura, his brother Mike, who was a great coach, is here. Denny Peer, Paul Costanzo, Tom Cornine, Ron Webb, Chris Steelman, a whole bunch of guys, and we just had a blast playing the game together. So I wanted to mention them. Now on to coaching. Everybody here has mentioned that common thread about coaching. We just always had outstanding coaches here at Roxbury. We were blessed. My dad, as Kevin said, he didn't have an athletic background. He was much more into behaviors, didn't know anything about technique. But the one thing he recognized was there was good people with good values here. And he was sending his boys, me being the first, and either there were 6 more behind him, to the right place. And that started my freshman year with 2 great teachers, Dick Pfeiffer and Jack Laverty. I didn't know anything. Dick Pfeiffer taught me how to play as an offensive lineman. It served me well, and I went on and had some success after that. Jack Laverty taught the game of football, and a lot of other things along the way. I'm pleased to say we had a ton of other great coaches. Some of them are here today. Dennis McDonald, Bob Morgan, Ron Rich, George McKay, Mike Ventura. They just were all committed guys who did the right thing, and really showed us the way. But the one most significant, contribution to my development was head coach Jim Fiorello. Coach really developed me as a player. He developed all of us. He taught technique, he taught teamwork, he taught leadership, and he taught toughness. And that was all, came together in 2 words, which all of us know. That was, you can learn how to play Roxbury football, right? And it was Roxbury football was 2 words, and you knew exactly what it meant. And part of it was you needed to carry it on to guys behind you because the guys in front of you taught you that as well. So he also gave me the confidence to believe, around my senior year that I could play at the next level, at the collegiate level. So Coach Fiorello, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and all the coaches. By the way, Coach Fiorello was also well known. Later, I went on to Rutgers, and he was known as a gravy train of talent, New Jersey talent, at a Roxbury High School to Rutgers University. So it was Phil Parkins before me a couple of years, and then it was me, and then Al Andrews, and Bruce Campbell, and my brother Kevin, my brother Michael. There was a string there where he was just sending D1 scholarship players to Rutgers University, and it was recognized down there because I was there watching it happen and hearing the coaches talk about it. I want to mention briefly the wrestling team. I also wrestled and was very proud of that. And by the way, it was a huge contribution. I love that sport, and it was a huge contribution to whatever success I had on the football field, just that training and that headset. But we had outstanding coaches. I walked into an environment, guys like Ronnie Stanrich are here, the people that are in the room that have been recognized in past years. Sam Rossi was the coach. It was the best wrestling program in the state of New Jersey. I came in as a kid, again, knew anything about wrestling, but I was in the wrestling room with great coach, great athletes that were willing to give, and then on top of Coach Rossi, there were guys like Ed Haid and Tom Greco